Holy shit, this game is insane. Armored Core 6 is beautiful, and I mean, come on, that really is all I need to say, isn't it? It's honestly breathtaking. It is every mecha fan's wet dream, and it's even, spoilers ahead, every Gundam fan's wet dream. We got the Sazabu, we got the Quabelli, we've even got Gundam-inspired armored pieces featured in this game. Armored Core 6 is high octane, it is balls to the wall, and once it grips you, it doesn't let go. And this is all just from a gameplay and art style point of view. Just you wait until we get into Armored Core 6's story. But there's so much that I want to talk about before that, because to put it simply, in the same vein as games like Yakuza 0, Armored Core 6 is just plain fun. It knows what it is and it fucking excels at it because it doesn't try to be something it's not. This game literally lets you live out your Gundam fantasy, from deploying onto battlefields in your weighty mech or being launched off a catapult, to absolutely annihilating warships by one-tapping the bridge, which is your god-given mecha right, in one of the craziest and funnest upper atmosphere missions I have ever experienced in a video game. And multiple other times in the game too, so don't stress, you don't have to wait till the very end of the game to get that balls to the wall crazy stuff. Now before I continue and carry on, I just want to re-emphasize once again, this video will contain many spoilers. Cool? Because this game also lets you live out your Zeta Gundam fantasy in every single ending, because in every single ending, pretty much everyone dies. Alright, let's stop talking about Gundam and the story for a second and let's straight talk about gaming. Because man, are we ever gaming? Armored Core 6 is a mission-based action mecha game developed by From Software, the same people who made this and a couple other indie games you might have heard of, as well as, of course, Armored Core. Now, there have been a lot of Armored Core games, a lot more than the 5 that Armored Core 6 would lead you to believe. And if you want to learn more about those, I'd highly recommend you check out Vardy Vidya's video where he went through and played every single one. It is comprehensive as all hell, and just like you'd expect from the guy, it is really well put together. Now that I've taken a fellow Aussie's dick out of my mouth, I can tell you with my full chest that I have never played a single Armored Core game before. Which, let's be real, may be a similar situation to a lot of you. I know that I'm not special in this sense, and AC6 has definitely put Armored Core on the map, with the subreddit alone absolutely blowing up from a pretty niche 10,000 users to over 120,000 now, which caused some fun, not safe for work art controversies where some horny motherfuckers were drawing the lewdest avatar imaginable to represent the voice ghost in your head throughout the game. All that to say, this game definitely blew the fuck up, and rightfully so. Sure, it didn't and will never reach the heights of something like Elden Ring, because let's be real, fantasy is a lot more broad and loved as a genre than mecha is or probably ever will be. But by God, did FromSoft ever cook and make the definitive video game mecha experience. My only previous experience with mecha games really was Mecha Assault on the original Xbox and Zoid's Battle Legends on the GameCube. Neither of which, obviously, I mean, by looking at their age, hold a single candle to what Armored Core 6 delivers. So it's safe to say the first time I booted up this game, I was awestruck, amazed, blinded by its majesty even. But let's circle back to my main point, missions. Remember those? With every game these days trying to bend you over worse than your local petrol station, or try to suck you off with their vast and empty open worlds that are about as entertaining as, I don't know, the Australian outback or just Canberra. Armored Core 6 sticking with its guns and taking us back to a narrative steered through structured and planned missions was such a breath of fresh air. Each set mission is handcrafted to go a certain way, and the best part is that they don't always have to go that way. Think of it like the silent cartographer from Halo, but on steroids. But not an overdose of steroids that led us to the gross and forgettable empty-ass open world of Halo Infinite, just a very healthy dose of oomph. And these missions become so goddamn replayable because of how much they can change, especially when you're venturing into New Game Plus. Not only do you continuously unlock new equipment for your mech, even throughout New Game Plus and Plus Plus, which will allow you to approach these missions in different ways, you'll also be given more choices to make in what were seemingly the same scenarios. But I haven't even scratched the surface on the best part about missions yet. Can you guess what it is? No, it's not S ranking them. What the fuck? Sorry, I ain't your guy for that. If you love S ranking missions and going through all that effort, by all means, enjoy the hell out of yourself, but it's not really for me. The best part about missions is that everybody remembers them, and everyone has had that same experience. You won't meet a single person who's played through Armored Core 6 that won't remember the mission with the Strider. It's the first time in the game we encounter something of that sheer scale, and then we can actually climb it and take it down. It just reminds me of that first time you see, I don't know, a scarab in Halo 2, you know? But just on a whole other, far bigger level. It allows for some amazing set pieces that'll always be able to gawk at and half the time uses wallpapers, and you're able to play those moments over and over again to your heart's content without having to slug through an entire game just to get back to that one point. Now, that won't come without its faults. Similar to Halo Combat Evolved and Reach, yes, we will occasionally go back to some of the same locations, but just like in those games, we get to approach them in different ways, or even explore them further, giving us new layers of depth to places that we might not have thought much of originally, which to me just shows far more creativity in the way this game was made, and is something I value and appreciate so much more than the current video game landscape of bigger is always better and all of these vast but empty open worlds. Even another YouTuber, Noodle, just did a great video on the topic if you wanted to delve into it more. But fuck that boiler kettle, add water to the cup and let it sit for 2 minutes guy, because you and I are here for giant fucking robots. So without further ado, let's get into Armored Core 6's story. Armored Core 6 has 3 different endings, and for the most part, they start relatively similarly for the first 4 chapters. We're an old 4th gen augmented human called C4621 by our handler Walter, who deploys us to the planet Rubicon 3. A more so barren planet removed from what we can only assume was former lavishness due to the infamous fires of Ibis, as well as, of course, it being overrun by corporate greed. So we land on Rubicon 3, get treated like the dog we are, steal a mercenary license along with a call sign, RB23 Raven, so that we can pursue a very lucrative and precious substance known as coral, and complete missions for some of Rubicon's finest corporations along the way. Corporations like the Big Dogs, the Arquebus Group and the Balaam Group, each of which having their own subsidiaries developing parts like Schneider and Dafeng, and their own private AC factions, the Vespers and the Red Guns respectively. We've also got more minor corporations like RAD, and rebels fighting against the corporations like the Rubicon Liberation Front. As the independent mercenary you are, you'll have the opportunity to fight alongside, in a similar interest to, or against any of these factions as the story progresses. And that can depend on how you want to play. There are certain parts of the game where you can make choices. So you can take the path that you deem more morally correct, or just be a typical merc and fight for the highest bidder. Our first monumental and, well, story relevant task to get our street cred, so to speak, is to climb the wall. And with the Vespers V4 Rusty by our side, at least for the most part, we achieve our goal. From that point on, we're known as the wall climber by some, and our skills are no longer up for question. But afterwards, something interesting happens. We get a call from our new friend Rusty, telling us that Arquebus had every intention to let us die out there, and seeing that we're technically brothers in arms now, he figured we should know. Nonetheless, we soldier on, earning more cash, until we get more of a personal request from Walter, as he puts it, which is to attack the watch point. And once we get close, we meet another AC pilot, Sula, another independent mercenary who's had a bit of a past with Walter and claims to have put down a lot of his former dogs. But of course, you are simply built different, so you storm past him and complete your objective of destroying the sensor valve, until a coral surge has sprung. And suddenly, You've got a voice in your head, and apparently she's hot. You don't really have time to worry about that right now, because if you thought Sula was the boss of this mission, you'd be very, very wrong. Because it's time for Big Daddy Altius to join the fray. Yes, here it is, the first official filter of Armored Core 6. Altius, an experimental machine that is hell-bent on fucking up your day after causing that coral surge. And for many people, including myself, it does just that. There is a reason many people consider this the first official filter of AC6, especially on the first run of the game, because with your limited Chapter 1 artillery, it's pretty fucking tough. But with enough perseverance and maybe some cheese build tutorials, you'll eventually make it through. Don't worry though, because by the time you see this guy again, you'll be left wondering how the hell you even struggled at all in the first place. Speaking of struggle, here's a key tip for you in case you happen to be stuck here. Put pressure on Altius, like keep the pressure on, and use your lock-on. And for the love of God, use the lock-on properly, please. And when I say properly, that means if you're using a controller, once you click in the right thumbstick and you lock onto the opponent, do not touch this thumbstick. Take your hand off of it and let the camera work its magic. I'll repeat it one more time. Do not touch the right stick at all. The camera will do all the work. So long as you do that, the camera will just track the boss no matter how fast it is, no matter where it goes. And this is something that I wish I knew before the end of my first playthrough. Would have made my life a million times easier. So if you take one thing from this entire video, like fuck its entertainment value, take one thing, press your right stick and don't touch it. It'll save you so much time and heartbreak. Anyway, with that, Chapter 1 is finally over, and the game really starts to open itself up to you. Since we popped the leak and the coral sprung, Walter's managed to deduce that the coral convergence is somewhere on the central ice field, and we're going to need to cross the Arlean Ocean to get there. How are we going to do that? With the intercontinental cargo launcher, of course. Thanks for the idea voice in my head. That voice is actually also a really important character named Air, but more on her later. So problem number 1 is we're going to need some sort of guide to get us to the launcher. And number 2 is that we actually need someone to figure out how to launch us. To fix both those issues, we enlist the help of one of Walter's friends, Carla, the head of RAD. Once we prove ourselves to her by taking out another little boss, navigating Grid 86, and dodging death lasers from space.
That's an extremely powerful laser. Be careful, Raven.
It's as simple as climbing aboard. Jokes! It's time for filter number 2, the Sea Spider. That's right, you thought you were done? You thought you were just gonna get off scot-free? No. This sector of the planet has one more fuck you to give out, and it's got 8 legs ready to mess you up in far more than 8 different ways. Oh, and it also turns to a Beyblade halfway through the fight. But with enough perseverance and maybe some songbirds, you'll put this coral-filled machine out of its misery. And I mention that because for some reason, Air is very concerned about the fact this machine was powered using coral. But once again, this is another one of those things we'll get back to later, because the puzzle will slowly piece itself together with time. And after that whole kerfuffle, Chapter 2 is over. So it's time to launch, arrive on the central ice fields, and lo and behold, the corporations are here too. But it looks like we've all made a little bit too much noise. After destroying one of their warships, the Planetary Closure Administration, or PCA, finally stretched their legs and come out in full force to suppress whatever activities you and the corporations are currently up to. Similarly to how the Covenant shows up to absolutely wreck Reach's day. But come on, do you really think the government, the Rubicon cops, are going to stop us? Nah, but they do pose a bit of a threat, I can't lie. You see, this is where we're introduced to some more menacing machines. Instead of all these stock standard MTs and tetrapods we've been facing thus far, the PCA has started to deploy LCs and HCs, or light cavalry and heavy cavalry machines. These are bigger, better, and quite frankly, the most cutting edge machines available. Now you might be saying, damn, if that's the case, then why the hell are we kicking their ass? And this is when I'm going to indulge you in a little bit of lore. Let me put it into layman's terms first with a bit of a comparison though. An LC would be the equivalent of, let's say, a Tesla Model 3. And a HC would be the equivalent of a Tesla Roadster. Arguably refined, modern, and undeniably fucking fast. But an AC would be more like a 90s tuner car. Like your GTRs, Supras, NSXs, RX-7s, you get the picture. There's not much wiggle room with these LCs and HCs. They're relatively new and they're built to spec. Whereas ACs are considered outdated tech, but there are some advantages to old tech. Like with cars, you'll have a much vaster array of parts available, meaning that you can tweak and tune an AC to perfectly fit your needs, so that it essentially fits you like a glove. And when you take that customizability and pair it with the vast majority of AC pilots who are augmented humans, suddenly it isn't a battle of raw power anymore. And the gap between these machines in battle is relatively slim, if not non-existent, or even leaning in the AC pilot's favor. Or if I be more specific, our favor. Because lore-wise and gameplay-wise, our feats as Raven are pretty freaking insane. Now there is one instance where we do see an augmented human in a HC, but once again, we'll touch on that much later. So in case everything we'd done so far wasn't enough, we decided to piss the PCA off even more by attacking their newly seized refueling base, destroying more of their LCs and HCs, poking our nose around Xylem, an uninhabited floating city, setting off fireworks, destroying their Cyberpunk 2077 looking ass cataphract, avenging all of our fallen comrades in the trailer in the process, and how could I forget? Attacking one of their smaller spaceports, destroying over 10 of their warships, and 2 of their finest machines and pilots with our main man V4 Rusty. All of which culminates something big being sprung on you. Something that you have no hope of taking out on your own. An automated sea weapon, the PCA's ace in the hole to defend the coral, the ice worm. You very luckily escape its first encounter as it retreats to go look after a bigger threat, but now it's lingering and definitely in the way, so we've got to find a way to take it out. And for one time and one time only, the corporations put aside their differences and everyone works together to screw the PCA and take this sucker down. How are we going to do it? Well, step 1 is to help Carla and RAD take over the old spaceport, and in turn, help to get her special project, the overt rail cannon, operational and siphoning power from the spaceport. Then we're going to obtain Arquebus's prototype, the stun needle launcher, and with that we deploy with a couple other ACs onto the battlefield, and it is time to take this beast down. Now, this is a gimmick boss, so if you somehow manage to fuck it up and fail, kind of on you, bro. But it's definitely a nice change of pace from some of the harder boss fights, that's for sure. And I mean, is it ever cinematic as hell? Destroy the Ice Worm is this game's Radahn fight, but replace Radahn with Rykard. It's fun, it gives you a bit of a power trip, and is it ever memorable? Like, come on man, that definitely just gave you chills right now. And for all my Zoids fans watching, how much does this just remind you of the final battle with the Death Soarer and the gravity cannon? Like, God, it's so cool. So we complete our mission, the Ice Worm is destroyed and Coral starts fleeing from its corpse. And we get some interesting yet troubling information from Air.
Coral voices. Lost again. Raven. There's something I have to tell you. The Coral. It's my family. My brothers and sisters. I am but a single wave. Born from the Coral Tide. A Rubiconian without a body. No one even knew I was there for such a long time.
So now we know that the coral is alive in a sense and is made up of most likely millions of Rubiconians that exist without a physical body. This might just make your journey a little bit more uncomfortable going forward, and will probably impact the choices you make going forward too. But before we continue forward, I want to take a step back for a second, because within chapter 3 is actually one of my favorite fights in the game I hadn't mentioned yet, and it's in a mission called Defend the Old Spaceport. You launch on this mission and are ready to take out an armed PCA force, but once you arrive there, the battle's already over. Then you hear an unfamiliar voice in your comms, calling your name.
Do you read me, Raven? I've identified the target. That's the mercenary who took your name. Let's see how far they can fly. On borrowed wings.
That's right, the real Raven is out and about and not too happy about what you've been doing with his name. But then after fighting and losing to you in the glory of battle, their handler essentially deems you worthy of carrying on the Raven title and decides she'll watch over whatever you get up to, see where you go on a Raven's wings. After this mission, Air looks into Raven and confirms that yes, it isn't an individual call sign, but a title passed down to those who campaign the free will that Raven stands for. So she continues to call you that, even though now she can confirm that Raven isn't really who you are. She had some doubts after the Cataphract mission, asking what you and Walter were even doing on Rubicon in the first place, but now it's officially all out in the air. Which does further go to explain why she decides at the end of chapter 3 is a good time for her to finally air out her secrets as well, revealing all about what the coral and what she actually is. Chapter 3 then ends with a shift in power dynamic. After taking out the ice worm, the PCA didn't really have much of anything left, and Balaam and Arquebus dealt blow after blow to them, essentially kicking them out of Rubicon. Arquebus also seized a lot of PCA tech and weaponry, putting them right on the top of the ladder. But we aren't here to play corporate politics. We're here for the coral. And as it turns out, the ice worm was defending the entrance to a massive underground facility, Watchpoint Alpha, which just might be where the coral is converging. Chapter 4 has us break through this stronghold layer by layer until a choice is given to us. We can intercept the red guns or ambush the Vespers. This choice doesn't impact the ending, but of course will give you different dialogue exchanges as you progress through the rest of the game. And to put it simply for you, one of these missions is much harder than the other. So if you're heading through the game for the first time, you're better off ambushing the Vespers. Or don't, I can't tell you what to do. Once you weaken the Vespers or absolutely annihilate the red guns, you then get deeper into the watch point and find that an AC has been tailing you.
Go deal with a mercenary who went in alone, they said. Figures. Seems both of us are too dangerous to keep around. And the higher-ups wouldn't miss an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. Hate to say it, but Rubicon still needs me. So, buddy, who needs you?
What's really interesting about this opening cutscene is the cinematography. They give Rusty all the spotlight and you are a glooming figure in the background. They've gone ahead and painted you as the villain. And it's just like Rusty said, looks like we're both too dangerous to be left alive. So now you've got to fight your buddy to the end, and when you win, he narrowly escapes. Pushing on, or really far down, we eventually reach an opening to Institute City. A city hidden deep underground, built even before the fires of Ibis. Again, if you're one of my Zoids fans, this feels very Zoid Eve, which is just really cool. So we soldier on into this newfound city to reach the Coral Convergence, taking out a couple of stray Vespers along the way, and once we reach it, we're faced with our toughest opponent yet. What some might consider the hardest boss in the game. I've even heard it called the Millennia of Armored Core 6. Cell 240, Ibis, or Haman Khan. That's right, here is our bona fide Quabelli homage in the flesh, and I gotta say, man, I absolutely love this fight. Now, if you asked me a couple of weeks ago what I thought of this fight, my answer would be a little different, because my first experience went a little something like this. Like, this is that 240 something boss I've seen everyone bitch about? That wasn't so bad, let me clip that.
Wait, it's coming back.
It's reactivating.
There's a second phase. Bro, fuck this boss. What the hell is going on? I can't keep up. And death after death, I struggled. Before unleashing the cheesiest, ugliest, most disgusting build known to man. Dual gats, stun needles, and tank legs. Which even then, didn't get the job done on the first try. And yet, if you look now, this is more along the lines of how the Ibis fight will go for me. I'm able to take my main build in and absolutely wreck its day. Sure, the nerf and actually learning how to lock on properly might have had something to do with it, but I like to think I've just gotten over that psychological barrier of frustration, and now can do this beautiful little dance where I'm not scared of going right up close and personal and poking the boss in the face. But now that we've taken out our biggest threat and are ready to move on, our crutch comes back to haunt us. A stun needle takes us the fuck out, and we're captured by V2 Snail from Arquebus. And unfortunately, so is our handler Walter. Now, it's unknown how we get to this point, but somehow we manage to escape Arquebus's grasp and swim our way through a sewer to a junk AC left behind by Walter as a contingency. So my headcanon is that he helped us escape in some way, more than likely by giving us instructions on how to get to this junk AC. Because otherwise, how the hell would we have ever found it in the first place? And we already do have another message from him about the dangers of the coral and why it needs to be burned as the mission starts. So it's not out of the realm possibility for him to give us more messages on how to get here. Speaking of the mission, escape is set in the combat zone of Institute City. So clearly, Arquebus didn't manage to get us very far, meaning I doubt we would have, met up with Walter in Corp jail and busted out together with him getting left behind, as cool of a story as that might have been. Also, I think it's a really good time to raise this point. Despite what some people, for whatever reason, might think, your character, 621, isn't just a brain or a pile of flesh and guts in a body bag. I think the story release trailer might have confused a couple people and led them astray, so let me clear the air. The interpretation I've seen some people have is that there isn't actually a pilot in the AC and that all of these machines are piloted remotely. And I can't fully blame anyone for that. The trailer itself does kind of lead you in that direction. It shows the big mecha fight and then the mecha explodes and dies, and then after that we're shown the body bag with all the needles coming out of the person, which could lead you to believe said person in body bag was just piloting the AC and now that it's blown up, has woken up. But that's not quite right. The far more likely scenario is that after Walter's hounds just got unalived by the cataphract and the laser, it was time to wake up his next dog from cryosleep. And the fact that it said in that trailer that said person on the table, 621, is being woken up does kind of infer that he wasn't just piloting an AC, especially because each of them had their own designated number, 617, 620, 619, etc. Plus, outside of the trailer, it's also made very evident to you that your character, 621, actually does talk and communicate throughout the game. Obviously, you never hear it, but there are multiple indicators that, you've been talking with Walter, Carla, and Rusty, for example, with them occasionally making remarks about things you've said to them. So you aren't some pile of flesh or vegetable, you're an actual pilot, a living and breathing, albeit augmented human being, that even has the capacity to swim because that's how you got to the junk AC. You can even see like half of its foot is underwater. You swam there. You're not crawling on the ground like some people seem to think for some reason. Now that that's out of the way, We jump in the junk AC, break the fuck out, and get rescued by Carla. Then help her to carry out her, or well, Overseer's plan. It gets sprung on us that her and Walter were at least around back when the fires of Ibis happened, and have since been working in the background with many other fallen comrades to monitor the coral's growth and be sure to burn it once it gets past the point of no return, or before it gets past the point of no return. And to do that, we head to the floating city of Xylem, which soon becomes the flying city of Xylem. And now is where our endings split. You can go one of two ways in your first and second run, and in New Game Plus Plus, more brand new missions and choices open themselves up to you throughout chapters 1 to 4, and you get a whole new chapter 5 that doesn't even start with the mission escape. But before I even touch on that, I'm gonna start by taking you through my favorite ending, the Liberator of Rubicon. Air gives you a mission to stop Overseer burning the coral and eliminating Cinder Carla. It's a bit of a hard ask considering she just saved your ass, but so is destroying the planet. So we take on Air's task. Zoom past V2 Snail, who's leading the charge on Xylem with V1 Frood because he's not worth our time, he's an arrogant prick, and do the 1v2 dance with Carla and Chatty. After finishing them off, it is time to bring the Xylem down, starting with its drive block and probably one of my favorite moments in the game.
It looks like the guest of honor's here. Hey, buddy. Never thought I'd be rubbing shoulders with the Liberator of Rubicon. Every Rubiconian who heard your cry rose up to fight. Let's show them there's a future for Rubicon beyond these scorched skies.
Like, come on, as if this is not the most anime fucking team up ever. Oh, fighting alongside Rusty is something else. It is amazing. And the fact that Rusty returns in a brand new and, let's be honest, Gundam inspired AC with a flashy new emblem showing that he has been unmuzzled is just so cool. I really can't think of a better word to describe it. Now you might be questioning why the hell Rusty is even here to help us in the first place when Arquebus is currently attacking the Xylem, and that's because he's a Rubiconian. This whole time he's been a secret double agent who infiltrated the Vespers, and that's also why he's been relatively helpful and transparent with you. That is, until you were about to reach the Coral Convergence and pose a risk to Rubicon. Of course, this fight was a setup, but even so, it's just like he says, there's no graver threat than power without purpose. However, since you've chosen to fight for Rubicon, and since Air put out the call-out message to gather some help, Rusty was the first person to put his hand up to fight alongside you. And when you do, I mean, come on, the lines just give me chills every single time.
You're out of luck. There's only one person who can keep up with me.
Oh, FromSoft, they get me every time. And you know what else it felt like? Once again, going back a little bit for my Zoids fans, if you think about the last battle in Chaotic Century when Raven teams up with Van, and Raven goes to talk about how Van's the only pilot he can respect. It is that exact same feeling that I get from this. We can all thank the amazing Chris Hackney for these moments. He voices Rusty and a lot of other characters you might recognize, like Dimitri from Fire Emblem Three Houses, or Gohan from Dragon Ball Super, and a whole laundry list more. So go show the guy some love on Twitter or X or whatever, he really deserves it. Now back to our anime plot. We continue to take down the Xylem until Arquebus's ace in the hole comes to play. God damn V2 Snail in the complete Balteus who has a bone to pick with you.
Your crime is that you ignored me, ignored Arquebus.
That voice line alone is exactly why I said we'll skip past Snail a little bit earlier, because it really is just funny to fuck with the arrogant prick. This line does change if you do face him in combat in the prior mission, so I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to you, but it's pretty satisfying. So hopefully, at this point, you've gotten far better at the game than when you first fought Balteus. And if so, this perfected version shouldn't be too hard. Sure, it's technically harder than the first version you faced, but so are you, and so's your grit, and so's your arsenal. So after we steamroll the arguably most hated character in AC6, unfortunately we've lost all communication with Rusty. It isn't clear what happened to him. A lot of people speculate that he ended up dying in a last-ditch effort against Arquebus's fleet, but I like to think he fucked off, dealt with V1 Freud, then lived the rest of his days happily on Rubicon. Now all that's left is to destroy the Xylem's ramjet engines and go home to Rubicon, the planet we've just saved. But it was never going to be that easy. God always gives its toughest mercs its hardest battles. And this battle isn't so hard in the difficulty sense, but hard because I couldn't quite see the screen over my tears. Up in the stratosphere, as the insanely appropriate chilling score sets in, at the end of it all, we're faced by our handler, Walter. Seemingly in pain and barely conscious, Walter pushes through to complete the mission. He's undergone re-education by Arquebus, and if we take the data log we found all the way back in Escape as what happened to Walter, we know that Arquebus was running tests to reduce the amount of human needed to pilot an AC. And it goes on to say how the latest test, presumably Walter, ended in somewhat of a failure. And the data log ends with the line, "Leave the torso intact next time," which would mean Walter is more than likely just a head and torso pumped with coral, shoved inside to a coral-filled AC by the time we meet him. And in the fight, he says a lot of things, which can be hard to hear over the amazing Witch from Mercury-like soundtrack playing in the background, but he continues to go on about finishing the mission and burning the coral, as well as a line that really stuck with me: "Undo the surgery, be normal again." At first, I interpreted this as him telling you to undo your own augmented surgery and live your life, as the line before this, he goes on to say, "You've earned all the credits." But after finding that data log, it almost makes me feel like he's either just or also talking to himself here. Clearly, he's past the point of no return, at least I think so. We're not fully adept with all of this world's possibilities, but maybe that hope of living on, reversing the surgery, and finishing the mission is all that's keeping him moving forward. He clearly doesn't want to fight you, and that's even somewhat shown in the way his AC fights in this final battle. Some shots seem like they're deliberately missing you. All of his shots start from one side very far away from you. It's this weird feeling of him not wanting to fight his old hound. He also goes to say that he sees it, the voice next to you. After being pumped with all that coral and augmented, he can physically see Air next to you. Obviously Air knows that at this point, and throughout the fight she genuinely starts getting emotional and starts yelling at both of you to stop. Despite everything, even though you technically were just one of his hounds, Walter clearly gave a fuck about you, and Air reciprocated that, despite his plan to genocide her race. Once the fight is over, it surprisingly breaks convention and subverts your expectations in two very brilliant ways. The first, of course, is making you, the hound, put his master down. And the second is when Walter, for a brief moment, bluffs a second phase, only to lower his weapon and let it all go. His final gift to you.
Look at you, 621. You found a friend.
God, like chills, man. I want to end the video here because it's such a perfect point and such a beautiful ending, but alas, we got two more to go. But before that, I just want to go on a tangent for a minute and talk about Walter's friends. for a second. So at a lot of points throughout the game, Walter specifies that these missions that you go on come from a friend. And we're led to believe that they're more than likely coming from Carla, as she's also a part of the group overseer that he is. But the only problem with that is there was one moment where Walter has a request from a friend and Air looks into his logs, then coming back to us and telling us that Walter hasn't actually made communication with anyone. So that begs the question, who's the request from? Is it just directly from him and he doesn't want us to know that? Or does Walter have his own little coral buddy beside him? I know it is a little far-fetched, but hear me out. Sure, he wasn't augmented in and of himself, but he was around coral and other augmented humans a lot as a survivor of the fires of Ibis. So I don't think it's too out there to think, like a secondhand smoker can still get lung cancer, that Walter might have come down with some symptoms of being exposed to coral and or had been attached to by a coral being during the fires of Ibis. Then the couple of arguments you might have to this would be, one, why in the world would he then want to burn the coral? And two, why does he only see Air after Arquebus's re-education? Well, you could say that the coral that lives in symbiosis with him could be more hyperlogical and actually sees a problem with its own race spreading throughout the entire galaxy. So ends up wanting to take the nuclear option. And you could also say that he wasn't exposed to enough coral to be able to hear or see Air. Kind of like our boy Iguazu, but we'll get to him later. I also found it really interesting that in his final dialogue, he talks about his friends and the mission, and then uses that exact wording to say that you found a friend. Obviously, we could take this as something far more symbolic, as you've now found something to fight for other than credits, but it's fun to speculate if old mate Walter really was just cruising around with a coral buddy by his side this whole time. I'm sure someone with heaps more research into the game and its data logs can probably prove me wrong in the comments, and by all means go for it. I would love to read it. I love everything about this game. It is so much fun and I'm keen to learn more. And now finally, I can discuss our second out of 3 endings, The Fires of Raven. And if the name hasn't told you anything, it is pretty clear it's going to be similar to an old Fires of Ibis we've heard so much about. Arquebus once again sends its entire military force to Xylem, but this time you've got to defend it by taking out V1 Freud and V2 Snail. Once you wipe them out of the way, it is time for one of the best missions in this entire game. Reach the Carmen line. This is the exact mission I was talking about at the very beginning of the video, where you live your Gundam fantasy. You get unlimited boost and you can suspend yourself in the air for as long as you want thanks to the coral wave you're riding. And with that, you fight in the stratosphere and can take out the entirety of Arquebus's fleet, flying from warship to warship just like Char Anzabal himself. It is crazy, it is balls to the wall, and just before you think it's over, there's going to be one final enemy for you to overcome.
Just another threat to Rubicon.
V4 Rusty. Once again, equipped in his brand new AC, muzzle off, he's going to fight you. Clashing heads in the ultimate AC battle. The unlimited boost is still active, so this is easily the closest thing you will ever probably in your life get to a video game rendition of a Gundam space battle, and I am all here for it. It would have been great if I could have actually seen what was going on past the tears in my eyes though. That's a pretty common theme in this game, clearly. But after a painstaking battle, in the end, you've got to put down your buddy and finish the mission. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, the Xylem is blasted by satellite cannons. And who would have thunk it? It's our old friend Air. So we take our final journey to LOC Station 31 and confront our old friend directly in the exosphere.
Raven, I will stop you. You will never burn Rubicon.
she's taken control of another Ibis series machine and is determined to stop you from destroying her whole race and her home. But honestly, who cares about that, right? So we stomp her ass into the ground like the Silver Snow ending of Fire Emblem Three Houses, and we set the coral ablaze. Personally, I'm not really a fan of this ending. I mean, I get it's kind of cool to see Walter's plan really come to fruition, but really, once we find out that the coral is sentient, you'd think it would change our outlook. I mean, sure, there's the argument that the coral is more of a parasite, forcing its symbiosis onto the galaxy, but to be fair, it's not like we've really seen any negative effects to the symbiosis. We've only seen the negative effects of coral being abused as more of a substance, like for example with human augmentation or by using it as fuel. To add another layer onto this, the coral beings aren't just sentient, they're also intelligent. And it's not like they're any more predatory than humans are. I mean, look what we've done to the Earth to make it work for us, without much regard for any other species. So why should they have to burn? Adding yet another layer onto this, what makes you think that burning the coral will work this time? The Fires of Ibis is a previous mimic of this event, and the coral survived, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So why even bother doubling down on the plan that got us here in the first place? Plus, we already know that the corporations do keep their own private coral reserves, that some of which might even be off-world at this point. So considering the way that coral spreads, burning up its source won't really stop it in the long run anyway. It'll just continue to spread from elsewhere. At least that's from our understanding in the game. Basically, to boil it down, the Fires of Raven ending is living in the past and continuing to repeat the same mistakes, whereas the Liberator of Rubicon ending is fighting for a new future. Or, as I saw from a random Reddit comment, trust the lady with a pretty voice in my head or destroy the entire planet. Then, finally, we've got our third and final ending. Alea Iacta Est, which is a fitting enough name, seeing as that's supposedly what Julius Caesar said when crossing the Rubicon River entering Rome. And by the time this ending's come to a close, the die really will have been cast. There are probably so many more other references like this throughout the game that have just completely flown over my head. And if you've got some cool ones, let me know in the comments, but we're officially in the end game now. This third and final ending is unique as it's been alluded to throughout our first two playthroughs in Original and New Game Plus. And that's because it all centers around the combat support system for mercenaries, Allmind. Allmind's been there from the very beginning, navigating you through all the tutorials as well as the combat arena's training simulator, even going so far as to give you extracurricular activities in New Game Plus. But going straight into New Game Plus, things start to change as early as Chapter 1, with a new mission popping up, Escort the Weaponized Mining Ship, which has got to be one of the biggest pain in the ass missions in this entire game. Now, it's not actually an escort mission, but fuck me, is it ever a challenge. Instead, the mining ship is destroyed at the very beginning of the mission, and we're ambushed by a whole bunch of coral machines, accompanied by Dark Souls fucking spinny skeleton boys back to back for 4 consecutive rounds. And honestly, this is pretty much just a build check, man. There is one build that will get you through this, and that's quad legs, songbirds, and flamethrowers. If you're not using all that and you somehow made it through this with either enough ammo or health to do it, more power to you, but I don't see any other build that'll finish this damn mission. Then we've got another mission, Obstruct the Mandatory Inspection, where we're accompanied by a fellow mercenary, Kate Marsden, who is really just Allmind, pretending not to be Allmind. This mission ends with you fighting off 2 PCA Special Forces machines accompanied by the Cataphract. While it sounds intimidating, it's really a 3v2 and it's not actually that bad. Then we've got an alternate Attack the Watchpoint mission, which actually goes to paint Sula as someone working for Allmind rather than a plain independent mercenary. There's also an alternate mission where we meet the real Raven, who intervenes after you take out 2 other mercenaries from the branch group, King and Chartrice, at the dam complex. This isn't a New Game Plus exclusive, you really just need to betray the red guns that attack the dam complex to unlock this, but I just hadn't mentioned it up until this point and the cutscene is really cool, so I wanted to bring it up. We also have an alternate version of Survey the Uninhabited Floating City, with Thumb Dollman, the leader of the Rubicon Liberation Front, being our alternative final boss. This is a really strange but interesting encounter though, as Dollman seems to know that we can see these voices as he supposedly once did, and also calls out to someone known as Seria, who turns out to be another coral wave that actually made contact with him even prior to the fires of Ibis. Seria wanted Dollman to trigger coral release so that humanity and the Rubiconians would merge, but Dollman refused. In his own way, he was a lot like us in his youth, and it just shows that we aren't the only one out there living in symbiosis with a coral being. Allmind wanted him silenced, plus he did attack us first, so he was. Then Allmind says something strange regarding the Rubiconians' symbiosis and how it's no more than the suppression and exploitation of coral, which leads you to think maybe she doesn't have humanity's or even the mercenaries' best interests at heart, or at code, because I guess she's an AI. This is further expanded upon in the mission Coral Export Denial, where Allmind tasks us to help Kate Marsden stop Arquebus from taking coral off-world. She says that it doesn't please us to lose the orphan coral, but when the release project succeeds, their sacrifice will be rewarded. Air is pretty uneasy about this though, as she deems freeing the coral and going to the other side as symbiosis, and as what's good for the Rubiconians, which doesn't seem exactly aligned with what Allmind's cooking up. Then we've also got another alt mission, which is Underground Exploration Depth 2, where the independent mercenary Cold Call, hired by G5 Iguazu, comes to try and take you out. The next change in this route is to eliminate the Vespers V3 O'Keefe. When you show up, he seems to know that you were sent by Allmind, calling you yet another candidate. It even seems like he was most likely a candidate in the past, going so far as to tell you that Allmind ain't worth it, and that we really don't want the coral release she's gunning for, as he feels if it's achieved, it'll strip away even the concept of humanity in and of itself. But in the end, of course, he loses his duel to us, and is somewhat happy to finally be able to rest. Then we've got the most fun alternate mission in Reach the Coral Convergence, where Allmind hits you up halfway through and informs you that V2 Snail is planning a sneak attack on you. So we skip the usual Ibis boss fight and go sneak up on Snail ourselves, emerging out of the pipe and hitting him with an RKO out of nowhere. That is until none other than G5 fucking Iguazu shows up, guns ablazing to wreck our day. And he says, here we are, just like they said. Then he proceeds to roast Snail, calling him the guy from the Iceworm mission with a stick up his ass, and says, fuck it, he'll kill both of us. Unfortunately for him, little does he know, we're actually the main character, so we go out of our way to kill both of them. Then Allmind officially says, we are one with them. On the record, we were killed off in Institute City, but Allmind says we won't truly be safe until we formally accept their protection. To do that, we've got to make our way all the way back up Watchpoint Alpha, where the fringes of what's left of the corporations are being annihilated by the drones that were left behind, as well as us running through. And to be honest, it's a pretty harrowing sight, to say the least. Then just before we can reach the rendezvous point, we're met by Pater. Remember that liaison we had with the Vespers all the way back? You know, the guy that did that funny impression of Rusty that one time?
I knew you could do it, buddy. I've got my eye on you. That is all.
Yeah, him. Since most of everyone in the Vespers is pretty much dead, he's been promoted to V3 and comes at you in a high mobility LC. This is the one moment I mentioned earlier where we get to see an augmented human and competent AC pilot instead opt for PCA weaponry, the top of the range LC. But it's all for naught anyway, as we're the main character and we absolutely destroy him. After this, one obstacle for Allmind's coral release plan stands in our way: Overseer and the Xylem. I mean, technically that's two problems, but Allmind said she's going to take care of Overseer, so it is our job to bring down the Xylem. You're then confronted by Chatty, who has a pretty sad end.
Chief, I couldn't. Never learn to laugh.
And we are almost at the end of this route. We meet Allmind in the exosphere atop LOC Station 31, where she's piloting an AC and standing above Walter's corpse. She says our role has come to an end, and then...
Well, well. I've been waiting for this, freelancer. I became part of this monster, so I could crush you. This time, you will die.
That's right. Throughout this whole game, this entire time, not only has it been Allmind, it has been Gun 5 Iguazu, the man who woke up and chose violence, the ultimate hater, who gave up himself, mind and body, so he could join Allmind just to have another shot at beating our ass. Bro really just pulled a Margin Vegeta on us, and honestly, I'm all here for it. In the fight, he talks about how he doesn't care all about this big plan and that he just wants to take us out. Once we take out the first phase, the second phase comes smashing down.
Irregulars. We will bring order to chaos.
Now, I can fight by your side.
But fortunately, Air joins us in the fight. She managed to hijack one of Allmind's dummy ACs and gives us some much needed help, because not only are we fighting the second phase of Iguazu, there are now 2 sea spiders accompanying him. To be fair, if you just narrow down and focus on him, you should be fine. But then that also kind of renders Air as useless help because she's just distracting the sea spiders. When she shows up though, Iguazu loses it. He recognizes her voice and claims it was her all along that was messing with his head, which takes me all the way back to my point earlier about coral attunement. You see, before he merged with Allmind, Iguazu couldn't actually hear Air. All he would do is constantly complain about this buzzing noise that would bother him whenever he was around you.
That damn noise again. Freelancer, you're doing this, aren't you? Make it stop. Make it. It's inside my head.
That's more than likely because he could sense Air, but he wasn't attuned to it. He was only an augmented human. But now he's been completely absorbed into Allmind and can hear her clear as day. Which leads me into a theory on Reddit I found that I really like, where Allmind isn't actually an AI, but a coral being. More specifically, the coral being Saria that first gained symbiosis all the way back before the fires of Ibis with Thumb Dollman, which would kind of explain why she turns her nose up at the idea of symbiosis after we defeat him, and says that it's no more than the suppression and exploitation of coral. Clearly, Dollman and Saria had a pretty toxic relationship, and if this theory were true, and Allmind was Saria, it would explain why she didn't feel that symbiosis was the answer, because she tried that already, and it ended with her feeling suppressed and exploited. So at this point, why wouldn't she double down on her initial plan of coral release? This is quite the theory, and there's no actual confirmation of any of it. But there is a lot of anecdotal evidence, and it's definitely a fun narrative to go down. Plus, it does kind of fit. So to make things more interesting, this is kind of the theory I'm going to go with. Of course, feel free to leave your own theories in the comments. I'd love to hear them all. Nonetheless, the fight with Iguazu presses on. He hits you with a, if you want some, I'll give it you, and keeps fighting until the bitter end, even after he's defeated, the hater in him cannot help but just try and get one final swing in, which genuinely jump scared me in my first playthrough. And it's over. Even after defeating Iguazu Allmind, we're still committed to coral release. Except now we have the trigger and we pull it ourselves, opening up a massive black hole or wormhole or whatever the hell that disperses the coral all across the galaxy. We wake up to a very clear Evangelion reference amongst a bunch of other wrecked ACs that are now inhabited by the coral. What was once just a wave on Rubicon 3, all of Air's brothers and sisters now have physical metal bodies to inhabit. It's happened. Coral convergence has been achieved. The die has officially been cast, and now there's no going back to the way things were. So the question is, how will we move forward as a species now? And that's where the game ends. That's where it leaves you. It is a very open-ended ending on how you think humans will evolve from here. Are we even human anymore like V3 O'Keefe thought? Who really knows? Unless we ever get a sequel or expansion DLC that really delves into this true ending, that is where Armored Core 6 comes to a close. And with such an open ending, there's so much room for speculation and different interpretations. Some people think that human existence is no more, and everyone's consciousness is spread amongst these giant metal robots, making everyone immortal. Don't really know how that one works, but it's an idea. Some take Air's final line of entering combat mode very literally, and think that all these Rubiconians who've now just gained new mecha bodies are going to wage an all-out war. Others mention that combat mode is just a normal mode an AC goes into to be maneuverable, as the only other mode an AC has is standard mode, which is stationary, as we see in the hangar. Whereas me, the guy who just made an hour or so long video on the topic,